would be great. Anyway, here we are. It is Friday. And good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us at Secular AZ today. We are a nonprofit organization focused on protecting the Constitution and the separation of church and state for over a decade. We continue to have lots of events coming up, including our Secular Summit, which is happening next Saturday, December 10th. It's a virtual event where the focus will be on religious cults and escaping those cults, including a former fundamentalist preacher who is now an outspoken atheist. Really looking forward to that discussion. The following week on December 16th, our last speaker of the year, Mia Bloom, will be speaking about conspiracy theories, and I hope that you all can join us. I know too that we have I know that Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix has asked us to share that they are having their winter solstice celebration. I believe it's on the solstice. So you can go to our events page and find that information. But today we are going to be speaking to Bradley Onishi. Brad is a professor at the University of San Francisco. He's the author of the upcoming book, Preparing for War, The Extremist History of White Christian Nationalism and What Comes Next, which comes out next month and can be pre-ordered now. So if you're here on the webinar, I'm pretty sure that Lindsay's going to throw that link out there. So if you'd like to get a pre-ordered copy, by all means do so and support the work that Brad does. He's also authored several other books, and he is the co-host of a podcast, which may just have my favorite name of a podcast ever, Straight White American Jesus. And it's also one of the most popular politics podcasts in the United States. He seeks to make the strange familiar and the familiar strange by providing insight into life's most fundamental questions. He often speaks about topics related to the radical conservatism and extremist religions that shape our world. Some of it right in our own neighborhoods. And coming off of an election cycle, I can tell you that those people are definitely your neighbors. Yep. So welcome, Brad. And is there anything that I left out of your bio that you'd like to add?
Not at all. Thanks. Glad to be here, and we'll explain to everybody why I'm sitting in a car in a minute. So.
Right. Well, again, thanks for your dedication. And with that, I'm really just going to kind of turn it over to you. I'll turn off my camera, and whatever you need to share, go ahead and share. And again, I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for having me. And I'm in a car because the power unexpectedly is out at my house and on my block, and so dropped my daughter off at daycare, and now I'm in the parking lot. So hopefully you can hear me, hopefully you can see me, and we kind of can make our way the best we can today. I'm going to share something with you, and that'll kind of help me just lead us through what I want to discuss today, and that is white Christian nationalism and the threat to American democracy. You see the link in your chat. My book here is called Preparing for War, and that's coming out. And I really approach this topic as someone who was a former insider. I converted to evangelicalism and into a church that I consider white Christian nationalist when I was 14. Before that, I was in a non-religious household. And then I was a minister by 18, married at 20, and then in charge of a group of students at a mega church by the time I finished my second year of college. And so I left that when I was 24. So I really approached this topic as a scholar, somebody who's trained in this, but as somebody who also lived it. And so my book contains a lot of memoir and personal stories, but also a lot of history and sociology that examines white Christian nationalism in the United States. I think it's good to kind of start with a definition and to talk about Christian nationalism and how it works. So before I talk about it as being on a spectrum, I'll just say that for me, a very easy way to think of Christian nationalism is thinking of the country, the United States, is built for and by Christian people. If you think that the country was built by Christian people who wanted a Christian place, then that's Christian nationalism. And it may not always be the kinds of extremist, militia-backed, marching around the government buildings in Maricopa County to prevent the election certification kind of Christian nationalism that makes the headlines. It may be as simple as, I think it's a Christian nation. I think the flag and the cross go together. I like that our money says, in God we trust, or one nation under God, or in the pledge, or so on and so forth. And if you think the country is for Christians in any way, you're a Christian nationalist. If you think that yeah, it's kind of a good thing. 45 presidents, 45 Christians of some kind. If you kind of think it's a good thing that Congress is 88% Christian, if you think that, yes, this should be considered a Christian nation, even though, yeah, of course, if you're Muslim or secular, you're allowed to be here. I'm just saying that the way the country was founded and the way its history has gone, and this is a Christian nation. Well, you're a Christian nationalist, okay? Now, as it says on the screen here, that exists on a spectrum, and Sam Perry and Andrew Whitehead, colleagues of mine, have written a great book called "Taking America Back for God," and they talk about how some Christian nationalists are extremists. They're prone to violence. Others are less hardcore, but willing to affirm Christian nationalist tenets about the supposedly Christian founding of America or God's plan for the country. Christian nationalism is on a spectrum because, according to them, and this is something that's somewhat hard to get your head around at times, it's less about belief and doctrine and more about historical identity, cultural preeminence, political influence. It's not a stable ideology as much as it's an identity, a cultural identity. So it's more a matter of how one thinks of oneself and one's community and one's nation, and the stories that you use to build that identity, okay? Now, what that means is that there's a chance that Christian nationalists are church-going people who are very into, I don't know why my slide won't move here. Let's see if it'll move. Come on, you can do it. All right, I'll just do it this way then. There we go. So let me back up. So Christian nationalism is three foundational components, and this relates to the cultural identity I just talked about. It's the myth of the Christian nation, nostalgia for past glory, and an apocalyptic view of the nation's future. Now, this is really where the whiteness aspect comes in, because it's white Christian nationalists who are really nostalgic for a past that they think it was a time when the country was great. It's also them who are really kind of sure that we're on an apocalyptic track, such that if Kerry Lake doesn't win, then the country will go to hell. I say that because the data shows us that when you look at Black Christian nationalists, for example, who may have some of the very same theology, they don't actually think, surprise, surprise, on the whole, that the country was once great. In fact, the country's history is chock full of violence and oppression and enslavement and so on. They also look forward to a day when the country will actually be the more perfect union that Abraham Lincoln talked about. It's not a nostalgia for the past, and it's not even an apocalyptic view of the future. It's a moving toward an America that is living up to its ideals and its creed for the first time. But when we survey white Christian nationalists and we ask them about the United States, they will tell you that the best time that there was in this country was the 1950s. That was a time when the nation was prosperous and strong and a superpower. Well, that was also a time before the feminist revolutions of the 1960s, before Stonewall, before the Immigration Act, before the Civil Rights Act, before the Voting Rights Act, before the feminine mystique, before all kinds of things that I could keep talking on and on and about. The Loving case that makes interracial marriage legal in all 50 states federally, and so on and so on. So you can see that the nostalgia here is one for United States where white Christians held power and independent women, racial minorities, religious minorities, and immigrants had a much less prominent place in cultural representation, in governmental office, and so on and so forth. This is also translated into an apocalyptic view of the future. The idea that we have disobeyed God as a nation, and if we don't get back on track, the country may go down the tubes very, very quickly. So this means that elections turn into end times events. It means that if your candidate doesn't win, you might think it's the end of the United States as we know it. And there's a kind of story to back that up. Let's see if my slide will work this time. Doesn't look like it. All right. So let's talk about the myth of the Christian nation. In ideological terms, Christian nationalists believe that the country was built for and by Christians, as I said. They see themselves, and again, This is a white Christian nationalist phenomenon. They see themselves as central to the narrative of the United States, not only as a nation under God, but when elected by God to play an exceptional role in world history. They see the country as a city on a hill, chosen to be the light of the world. The Christian elements, belief in God's rule and election, are fused with a white nationalist ideology. The idea that the United States is superior to all other nations, that we should take an America first approach to policy and trade, and the white people deserve to remain at the top of the social, political, and economic hierarchies. Christian nationalists believe in the Christian nation, even if, and I mentioned this just a minute ago, but I'll reiterate it here, some of them do not regularly attend church, read the Bible, or pray. If it's a cultural identity rather than a set of ideological beliefs, then it's possible for someone to take on that identity without going to Bible study, without being part of a church, without reading the Bible or praying at home. Now, lots of Christian nationalists do all those things, but it's very much possible for many Christian nationalists to not do them and still sort of believe in these myths, believe in these stories, believe in this kind of nostalgic past and this apocalyptic future. One story I tell about this is of a pitcher for the Mets, the New York Mets, the baseball team. And in the wake of the George Floyd murder and the protests that arose after that, there was a planned situation before one of the games where everyone on both teams was going to kneel for the national anthem, and everyone did, all the coaches and the players, except for one guy on the Mets. And afterwards, somebody asked him, "Hey, you were the only one who didn't kneel. Why didn't you?" And he said, "Well, I can't kneel for the flag. I'm a Christian." And if you're a reporter in that situation, it's very hard to kind of follow up in a way that doesn't make you out to be anti-religion. It's one of the really kind of genius moves that Christian nationalists make, that they put you in a place where it sounds like you are anti-religion. And if you're a public figure, if you're a reporter, that's not going to play well in the general public for the most part. And they're banking on that. Well, a little bit later, somebody asked him on the record, "What church do you go to? You said you're a Christian. That seems important to you. That's why you couldn't kneel for the national anthem." And he said, "Oh, I haven't gone to church in years. I don't have a church." So when he said Christian there, he was using that as a way to kind of ameliorate his actions for not wanting to kneel for a protest against racial violence. The Christian was what Sam Perry calls a positive dog whistle. It was a way to not say, "Hey, I'm white, I'm not going to kneel," or "I don't care that a black man was killed by the police," or so on and so forth. And this is one of the ways that the story that Christian nationalism tells is played out in the public sphere. Let's talk about nostalgia for the past. So here's John Wayne. Christian nationalists share the conviction that the country has declined over time due to the growing prominence of outside invaders and ungodly forces. As Perry and Whitehead argue, Christian nationalists view the United States as similar to Israel in the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. If the nation disobeys God's commandments, it should expect divine retribution and ruin. And Christian nationalists hold the keys, in their minds at least, to what God wants, what he commands, and who is to blame when the nation gets punished. There's a really, really frightening example of this in this video here that I don't think I'm going to be able to play because I'm in my car. But this is Jerry Falwell. Some of you will be familiar with him, leader of the religious right, founder of Liberty University. And you can look this up on YouTube later if you'd like, Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson at 9/11. In this clip, and I am not exaggerating, I am not being hyperbolic. Jerry Falwell says that 9/11 is to blame on feminists, lesbians, gay people, the ACLU, and the secularists, because they have taken God out of the country, God out of American schools, and God is punishing us for that sin. So the punishment for disobedience and blaming others is a strong motif in white Christian nationalism. And one of the things that is present in this video and present in many other examples is the blame is rarely on them. It's not a, "Hey, we messed up." It is all of those others, the ones who coincidentally gained more rights and representation in the 1960s. Black folks, people of color, gay, lesbian, trans, and other queer folks, women, immigrants, they're the ones usually that we can blame for America's disobedience and the divine retribution that God is enacting on the country. The final trait of Christian nationalism is its apocalyptic tone. The evangelical emphasis on the end of the world. You might have heard evangelicals, and I'm sure you have, talk about how Jesus is coming soon. Well, they transpose this into a crisis narrative that envisions the country as on the precipice of a catastrophic decline. If real Americans don't take decisive action, the story goes, they will not simply lose their majority in the houses of Congress or see a political opponent in the White House. The country as they know it will be gone forever. And so you can see how this kind of crisis narrative ramps up the rhetoric surrounding elections, whether those be a presidential election in 2020 or in Arizona, an election for governor, an election for Secretary of State, and so on and so on. One of the things this also does is it turns your political opponents into monsters because they're trying to destroy the country. They're literally trying to end it. Well, it's very hard for democracy to function if one side of a two-party system sees the other side as demonic monsters who are trying to bring the apocalypse to the country. It's very difficult to have dialogue, compromise, reaching across the aisle, all the things that are supposedly good. None of that can happen. It also puts another side in a strange position because if you are seen as a monster, there's very little chance you can reach out your hand as a peace offering to say, why don't we talk about this? Because no matter what you say, the other side sees you as a monster, a demon, something that should be destroyed rather than ever engaged or discussed or talked to. You don't watch Godzilla and think, maybe we can talk him down from the Empire State Building. You don't, or maybe I mixed up my metaphor there. Did I do that? Is it Godzilla and King Kong? Anyway, I apologize. I'm in my car. So you can't have a good dialogue with somebody that you've demonized, and the apocalyptic tone of Christian nationalism plays right into that. Let's go to the next one.
And while
So
you're going,
I mentioned this.
while
Sure.
you're going there real quick, we do have a question in our chat. And the question is this strictly a United States phenomenon?
Yeah, great question. It is not strictly a United States phenomenon. It looks slightly different, as you might imagine, in different places. But one of the things that I think people are becoming more and more aware of is that whether it is Bolsonaro in Brazil, whether it is Vladimir Putin in Russia, whether it is Viktor Orban in Hungary, there is now a transnational network of Christian nationalists who are able to contour Christian nationalism to their own countries, but who also rely on each other to find ways of articulating these principles. One of the best examples is the ways that James Dobson and other conservative evangelicals started infiltrating Russia in the 90s and introducing family values rhetoric into Russia, to the point that Vladimir Putin, in one of his recent speeches about the war in Ukraine or the invasion of Ukraine, talked about the war as a war on Satan, defending the family and the spiritual values of Russia. Now, it sounded almost like a radio hour from James Dobson and Focus on the Family. Well, that's not an accident. CPAC, one of the most prominent conservative conferences that's chock full of Christian nationalists, was recently held in Hungary, and Viktor Orban was in attendance, and so on and so forth. So all that to say, it is not just limited to the United States, but it takes on different iterations in every place that it goes. And the United States is a kind of global leader in this rhetoric and its export. All right, if we talk about Black Christian nationalists in this country, there's a sense in which, as a secular group, you may think, well, I don't really like any Christian nationalists, And I think we should have a robust discussion about the freedom from religion and the separation of church and state. And I totally agree. However, I think it is important to point out that on the whole, Black Christian nationalists do not have the nostalgia or the apocalypse. They want the country to live up to its promise of freedom, equality, independence, and the pursuit of happiness for the first time. And so Raphael Warnock, who's up for re-election here in a couple of days, says, I've been trying to point us toward the highest ideals in our humanity and in the covenant we have with one another as American people, that all of us deserve an opportunity to create a prosperous life for us and our families. So you can see here that it takes a different tone, and there's a different set of stories that inform Black Christian nationalism on the whole, as opposed to white Christian nationalism. Just one more slide, and then happy to take all questions and talk in detail about anything that I missed or is of interest. After January 6, 2021, a new picture, I think, should come into focus. And I'm sure there are people in this group who already have this view. But it's that many Christian nationalists are a clear and present danger to the United States of America. They're homegrown radicals who prioritize white Christian supremacy over multiracial democracy. They're not interested in pluralism. Their goal is not a model of governments based on dialogue and debate. The goal is to take back America by any means possible. I'll just say two things about this. Lauren Kirby has a great book called Saving History. And in that book on page 51, she says that evangelicals, and I would expand this to Christian nationalists, believe that they founded the country. They're the founders of the country. So yes, you may be like I am, an Asian American person whose family came here at some point, or you might be a Black person who is the descendant of slaves. But it was really the white Christians who founded the country, and thus we deserve to be in power and hold sway. And if you tell us we can't, then we are the victims. And the toggling back and forth between founder and victim is always evident if you try to press Carrie Lake on her claims of election fraud. She'll talk about how the media is out to get her and all the other God-fearing patriots that exist in Arizona. If you try to say that you're not allowed to simply just hold power and overrun the Capitol because you didn't win and you don't feel like you won and you're not okay with that, well, you're persecuting me. I'm a victim of the woke mob and of all the people who are trying to overthrow the America that I grew up in. So this founder victim motif, I think, is very helpful. Number two, I'll say that one, and you know, I'm a 90s kid, so some of you might be Simpsons fans out there. When I tell my students about this, they're all young and they don't get it, but hopefully some of you will. You all remember, if you're a Simpsons person, Mr. Burns and Ned Flanders. Well, Ned Flanders is the irritating neighbor. He's pious, he goes to church, he's always happy, he's telling Homer Simpson, don't drink so much beer and use bad language and that kind of stuff. He's an irritating moralist. And that's how most Americans in the media and in the government view white Christians. They're just pesky moralists. They want us to go to church and sing the national anthem and God bless America and Amazing Grace. They're harmless. Yeah, they're annoying. And I don't agree with them, but come on, no big deal. And my argument would be that we should see white Christian nationalists as Mr. Burns. Mr. Burns is an authoritarian. He wants to have power over all of Springfield. He doesn't care how he gets it. He has no compassion. He has no empathy. All he cares about is a will to domination. And to me, he's the character that we should see exemplifying white Christian nationalists more than Ned Flanders, the pesky moralist. I'll stop there. I appreciate all of your questions and your attention, and look forward to talking further.
Well, I understand the Simpsons reference. I still remember when, like, I thought The Simpsons was such a great show back in the 90s, and this was when I was like in high school. I would actually record it on VCR and edit out the commercials. And so for a while there, I had several tapes of The Simpsons just because I thought their social commentary was so spot on. And that comparison really makes sense to me. And, you know, it made me think, so when I first came to this organization, so just a little over a year ago, there was a local reporter who was doing a lot of work on local school boards, right? Because in 2020 and 2021, we saw a lot of these Christian nationalists showing up to their school board meetings complaining about masks and school closures, and then suddenly it was CRT and social emotional learning, right? And so he was going to all of these board meetings and tracking what was going on, and we wanted to give him an award to say thank you for the work that you do and you're reporting on these Christian nationalists. And he declined the award because he said he didn't want to alienate his Christian followers. And it's just like, for me, as somebody who's just kind of entrenched in this world, right? Like we're not talking about like real Christians here and people who actually try to follow the teachings of Christ. We're talking about a political ideology. But I do think too, that we're kind of maybe seeing more recognition of the difference between this, like traditional Christianity and white Christian nationalism. At least I hope it seems that way. So that's my commentary on that. But we do have a question. This one comes from Jeffrey, and he asks, how much blame does right-wing news media bear for this phenomena? Fox News, OAN, Rush Limbaugh, etc.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll point you to a great book. It's called The Shadow Network by Ann Nelson. And in that book, Ann does a great job of showing us a couple things. The right-wing media cosmos did not begin with Fox News or OAN. It began a century ago. And it began when conservative Christians said to themselves, we don't like the media that is out there. We don't like, big, scary new things like films. These are scandalous. I went to church with people who had never gone to the movies, this kind of stuff. And they began building their own autonomous media ecosystems. And those became incredibly prosperous. So if you fast forward to the 70s and 80s, what they do is they take over the airwaves, the radio airwaves in large swaths of the country. So let's say you live in Oklahoma, okay? You wake up, you're eating your cereal, Fox News is on, right? Because nobody watches CNN or MSNBC, they're communist. Okay, so we got Fox News, great. But then I get in my car and I drive half an hour and I got the radio on. And the only radio stations available are Christian radio. And I'm not exaggerating, I'm right. There's very little chance you're going to land on NPR or a college radio station. And so you're going to hear someone tell you that Hillary Clinton is a demon and she smells like sulfur and that Barack Obama has serpent DNA. And then you're going to get to work and your pals are going to have listened to the same thing and you'll talk about it. And then that mega church up the street who's coordinating with that media group is sending mailers to your house telling you who to vote for and why, because we all know these folks are godless, secularist heathens who want to destroy the country. So here's the point. You're surrounded in a media environment that is very hard to get out of. So don't get me wrong, Fox News is a cancer on our society. You can quote me on it. You can put it on YouTube, whatever you want me to say. That's true in my view. It's not news, it's propaganda, but it's not it's a big node in a network of media components that inform how people understand reality. And I think that is the overarching problem.
Well, and I grew up in a very small town in Northern Illinois in the Midwest. And though we were fairly close in proximity to Chicago, if you ever drive to central or southern Illinois, I can confirm that is absolutely true. The amount of radios, you might have a classic rock station, maybe an oldies, some country music. There's definitely going to be a Christian radio station. And of course, if you tune into AM radio, you're going to get all the hateful talk radio from the AM radios. And Brandy Reese says, as someone who grew up in Oklahoma, I can confirm this. Absolutely. And in fact, so we just had an election here in Arizona, just like everywhere else, but I was actually a candidate for state Senate, missed it by this much. But as I knocked on the doors, I was it was shocking to me, a couple of doors that I knocked on, to know that my neighbors are, they mentioned adrenochrome and the fact that all Democrats are Satanists, baby killers who want to kill babies so that they can suck the adrenochrome out of their bodies and give themselves eternal life. I've never partaken in that, but you know, but I couldn't convince my own neighbors of that. You know, they brought up Bill Gates and the fact that the vaccines are implanting microchips so that they can track our every move and you know, mind control. I was truly shocked at some of the statements that came out of the mouths of some of the people who live right down the road from me.
Well, and if I can just comment, you know, you
Oh, looks like he's frozen right now. It's not just mine, so we'll hopefully wait. I know that Brad had a power outage today, and so that's why he's in his car. So I will do my best to vamp here while he tries to get back, and I'll go back through and look at some of the comments. Again, Brandy says, the attendees at the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors meeting this week to certify the election had all of these hallmarks. They sang God Bless America and Amazing Grace while we were waiting in line to get in. They had a horn of Jericho that they were blowing, and several of them read Bible passages as their testimony and or spoke with all of this good versus evil that you're talking about. Yeah, unfortunately, I watched some of those videos of the attendees. And again, this will be my opportunity as we wait for Brad to hopefully rejoin us. But these people are showing up to their meetings, and though some of them are not even from Maricopa County or even Arizona, you know, we knew that there were people coming in from Colorado, from San Diego, from New Mexico, et cetera. Nevada, I think another one was based in. A lot of these folks consider themselves influencers or citizen journalists. And I'd like to know what they do for a living, because I find it really, you know, if I could just travel and go to see like maybe music festivals that I'd really like to see, to be able to afford to do that. But these folks are traveling around like, you know, people used to follow the Grateful Dead back in the day, but they're following Trump rallies. They're showing up to school board meetings. They're going to Board of Supervisors meetings, and they're getting scripts essentially from these white Christian nationalist organizations like Turning Point USA. Project Blitz has entire scripts for people to be able to read, so they hit all the same talking points. So yeah, that's a great observation, Brandy. Let's see. That's a good question, Andy, and hopefully Brad will come back about, do Christian nationalists view Jesus as a Middle Eastern Jew? Relationship of Jesus and guns. Let's see. Yes, indeed, Jeff. I do think that the rest of the world thinks that the United States is batshit crazy, and I'll just go ahead and say that. Let's see. And then speaking, and I recommend Judith especially, go ahead and check out Brad's podcast of the Christian left, the religious left. Because it says here, Hillary's a professed Methodist and Obama attended a United Church of Christ church in Chicago. But I love the discussion that he, and I think Dan is the other guy that does the podcast with him, that they had about the religious left. And I think it's like a 2-part series too. So definitely check that out. And I'm pretty sure that Lindsay has put the link in there. Diane says that our cell phones are tracking our every move. Now that's true. I don't think my vaccine is tracking my every move. I think it is definitely my cell phone that's doing that. And I do that willfully for some weird reason. Here's another one from Sandra. She says, I was told when knocking doors, my neighbor accused me of converting children to gays and trans. Yes, I got that same accusation. I was called a groomer, an indoctrinator, child molester, you name it. And when that kind of language comes from your neighbors, it kind of makes you think about the world in a different way. Let's see. Let's see. I want to make sure I get everybody's. John says, okay, we'll get to your question. Hopefully if Brad can come back. And then Brandy says, I can also confirm I saw many of the same crowd at this meeting, meaning probably the Board of Supervisors meeting, that were also habitually down at the Arizona legislature giving testimony and speaking. Yeah, I recognized a lot of the same faces as well. So yes, they do travel together and they all seem to know one another. Yeah, it's like this weird culty club, right? Like that it's like they feel like, I think they have an exclusive membership. I'm sure they get all kinds of warm, fuzzy feelings, you know, physiologically when they get to see these people who are familiar to them. It's almost like a family reunion. And in a time in our lives when so many of our family members, you know, were estranged from them. I mean, I didn't talk to either of my sisters for Thanksgiving. And so, yeah, it makes, you know, they've lost family just the same way that we all have lost family. And so it makes me wonder, is this like their comfy, cozy space where they can see people? Because all the leftists in their family are complete, in their minds, complete whack jobs who are part of this conspiracy to, you know, kill babies and drink the adrenochrome or whatever. So I'm so glad that you got back to us, Brad. We do have some questions here.
Okay.
No worries. I was vamping, doing my best. So let's see. So I want to go back up. There was a question here. Let's see. Okay, this is a great question from Andy. How do Christian nationalists view Jesus as a Middle Eastern Jew and the relationship of Jesus and guns? Good question.
It's a great question. So the reason that I call my podcast Straight White American Jesus is that most white Christian nationalists do not think of Jesus as a Middle Eastern man who was born in Israel, Palestine, and would probably be considered a person of color if he were walking around in the United States today. They see him as a white person. So in my classes, what I do is what I have students do is I have them Google Jesus, and I have them go through the dozens of images of Jesus where he really looks like his name is Hans from Norway or Sweden, and like he's a Northern European. And so in their popular imagination, he's not a Jewish man from the Middle East. He's a straight white American guy who drives a big truck, and they will twist everything they can in the New Testament to make Jesus into a tough, angry, clear out the room if I need to kind of guy. He's not the turn the other cheek Christ. He's the, if I need to turn over a table or use an AR-15, I will Jesus. And unfortunately, that's how they proceed. We could ask biblical scholars, is that accurate? Is that really what we see? And most of them would probably say no. Doesn't matter.
Well, and for me, like the frustrating thing about these folks who do try to identify themselves as Christians, you know, they quote a lot of the Old Testament, but they make it sound as if it came from, you know, the teachings of Jesus.
Totally.
So,
you know, I always remind my students, Jesus was a political revolutionary who was killed by the state. He was, you realize that, right? You know, and that's just kind of a good way to get into it. So.
No, Jesus was a socialist. We all know that, you know, and if he were to turn over tables, it was because he wanted to, you know, protect the rights of everybody, regardless of their race, ethnicity, social class, etc. But it's really amazing to me how they can kind of contort the teachings of Jesus and deny, you know, where his homeland was and what he would have looked like historically. Yeah.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Okay, let's see. So, Diane's being sarcastic. Diane's our head of legal. She says, were they aware that Amazing Grace was written to say that slavery is a terrible thing? Probably not. Okay, let's see. So here we go. Here's another question. This one says, what generalities can be made about the Christian nationalists in terms of socioeconomic, educational, ethnic terms, and any profile of those who clearly are the opposite of Christian nationalism?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if we talk about white Christian nationalism, one of the scary things is that we can think of large percentages of the population of the United States population being white Christian nationalists. Now, that doesn't mean evangelical. You can be white Christian nationalist and be Catholic. You can be white Christian nationalist and be Pentecostal. But if we just talk about white Christian nationalism as superseding those denominational lines, we're talking about something like in the high 40 percentile of the country, right? In terms of the amount of folks who subscribe to this ideology or this cultural identity in some way. Now, there are, and this is something that's kind of difficult to see sometimes. There are a lot of folks who are not college educated that are more susceptible to the more extreme fringes of this movement, the conspiracy theories, the kinds of lies about the killing of babies and the serpent blood, QAnon, so on and so forth. However, there are many upper middle class and affluent and college educated people that are part of this movement in every way. Stuart Rhodes is the Oath Keeper leader. He was just convicted of seditious conspiracy. Yale Law School, right? Ted Cruz, Yale Law School. Josh Hawley. I mean, they're not outliers in the movement. So I grew up in Orange County, California. We were pretty middle class. My dad drove a Corolla, but there was people in our town who were pretty not middle class. They had fancy cars and fancy houses, and some of them were at J6. I know that. So it'd be easy to say, well, it's just uneducated poor folks. Just not true.
Oh, and we have some highly educated elected officials in the state of Arizona who subscribe to this ideology. I mean, right now, I think it was today that the leadership in the House and the Senate at the legislative level here in Arizona announced who is going to be the chair of certain committees. I mean, we've got Wendy Rogers, Senator Wendy Rogers, who affiliates herself with Nick Fuentes. I mean, everybody knows who she is, whether you're in Arizona or not, right? And she's now our head. She's the chair of the elections committee. Yeah, it's a weird time. And Jake Hoffman, who's, I don't know if he's still in the House of Representatives or if he's now in the Senate, but he was one of the fake electors here in Arizona in elected office. It's kind of alarming. We should all be really alarmed that these folks hold positions of power at every level. We had some very worrisome people get elected to their local school boards. A local school board here in Arizona just elected a 3%er, a guy, who's affiliated with the 3%ers, who wants to discriminate against LGBTQ youth and deny them any kinds of rights. I mean, at the state superintendent level, Tom Horn, unfortunately, beat out the incumbent, Kathy Hoffman, who's an actual educator. Tom Horn left his prior office in disgrace in the 2000s, I believe it was, but he just got reelected and he put out an 8-point plan with an SRO in absolutely every school, with no more SEL, no more social emotional learning, harsher discipline, a total focus on standardized tests, which we all know are racist in nature. And it just feels like it's taking us backwards. And combine that with the fact that that they also voted to this major voucher expansion, where we can now take 7,000, that were mostly rich families, of course, are taking $7,000 as essentially a taxpayer subsidy to pay for the private school education that they were already planning on, because private school education costs $20,000 to $25,000 in Arizona. This is just, and when you look at the zip codes of the families that are taking advantage of it, it's our wealthiest zip codes. The same folks who voted against fully funding their schools locally through overrides and bonds. So education in Arizona is really, public education in Arizona is really in peril these days. We have a few more questions here. Yes, Brandy says, we know this crowd isn't big on history, 100%. There's no reasoning with them. Yep. There was an incident here, Brad, where in 2021, somebody at the Capitol noticed that there was an appeal to heaven flag.
Yep. Yes.
And so, we filed a complaint. Nobody knew where it came from. And then one day it just quietly went away. A smaller version of the flag was put up later on in the session at the Senate instead of the House of Representatives. So we'll continue to monitor that. But Mary says that the pine tree, that according to ConfederateShop.com, the pine tree flag was called Another American Rebel flag. And that movement, they call on people to run for elected office and to rule with biblical principles in mind, which is Old Testament principles, right? Yeah,
that appeal to heaven flag is actually a key to understanding January 6th. It's inspired by the New Apostolic Reformation. We have a whole series on my show coming out on this.
Oh, great.
Their theology is a dominionist theology, and what that means is God has given Christians dominion over every domain of earthly life, education, entertainment, economy, and government. And so the appeal to heaven flag is a flag that says we're going to run for every office, from dog catcher to mayor to state senator to president, and we're going to take over. We want dominion. We're going to dominate the public square, and that's what that flag means. And if you go back to the J6 footage, you'll see it everywhere.
Judith says, please ask him to contrast with mainline Christians and progressive Christians.
Yeah, happy to do that. So, mainline and progressive Christians are those who generally understand American history in ways that some of us might. It's full of violence and marginalization of many people. The goal is to extend rights to many more as time goes on. Mainline Christians are those who see the gospel is about social justice rather than domination, as I just talked about. They are understanding their faith to be collective. We as a group, as a church, as a society, we need to create a situation where inclusion and justice and peace are more available to more people. That's the goal, okay? And so the mainline view does not interpret the Bible literally. They're willing to say that Genesis is a myth, that Genesis is not a literal science document, and so on and so forth. And so you have many mainline and progressive Christians who are LGBT affirming, who have a Black Lives Matter flag in their church, who are very much on the side of inclusion for all. They do not, and like, so I work with a group called the Baptist Joint Committee, and their whole goal is to say, we want a public square that is free from religion, because that ensures the freedom of religion. So they work all the time with the Freedom from Religion Foundation or Americans United. So they are there. They're a lot smaller. They're a lot less funded. There are many fewer billionaires donating to their cause. And they've lost the culture battle in the sense that when the average run-of-the-mill American thinks of Christian, they think of whoever it may be. And I don't even know who the examples are anymore. The world's lost its mind. But it used to be George W. Bush. It used to be Tim Tebow. It used to be Sarah Palin, right? Now that's different than thinking of Martin Luther King Jr. or Reinhold Niebuhr or FDR, right? And that's where things are today. They are no longer in the social imaginary the default Christian, right? Or the real Christian. And that's why you hear about them a lot less.
Well, and if I were to think of a political leader who is a true Christian, I would think of Jimmy Carter, right? Because this guy is faith in action, right? And he actually, guy builds houses. I think he's probably slowed down now, but he, in my mind, is a real Christian. And I have another question real quick, just because, so, we have a few people here who I would consider Zionists, just to prioritize the needs and the freedoms of the Israeli people and kind of deny or paint this other picture of the Palestinian people. What's the connection between Zionists and Christian nationalism?
Yeah, I just want to say the Jimmy Carter reference is great. I spent a lot of time on Jimmy Carter in my book, saying he was everything they wanted. This is a peanut farmer who leaves the house with his Bible, married his high school sweetheart, was an officer in the military, and they said, we want power, not piety, so get out. For the Christian nationalist, Israel plays a specific role in history. It's where God is chosen to found his nation and where he will come back. And so you're going to hear many, many, many of them talk about their love for Israel. You're going to hear them talk about how they have a special love and appreciation for Israel as a nation. They're going to give money. They're going to, and they're also going to do things that are really inappropriate in my mind, like have certain flags and shofars. I mean, I've been to Christian, as a researcher, I've been to revivals where Christians have a menorah and have, the Jewish flag and things like this. To me, it's very transactional and it's very functional. They're interested in Israel for what it does for them in their eschatology, their view of the apocalypse, their view of the end of the world. There's a big difference between being invested in Israel functionally and transactionally and loving Jewish people, much less Palestinian people. I'm Japanese American. There's a lot of people who love sushi and they're willing to use Asian slurs behind closed doors. We all know. So you can love someone's something and not love them. And I feel like that's kind of the way to think about the Christian nationalist relationship with Israel.
Great. Okay, we have another question. What kind of public statements are made by Christian nationalists regarding the role / position of Muslims, Jews, Hindus, Blacks, Unitarians?
On the more, I talk about as a spectrum. On the more, what we might call soft side of the spectrum, it's look, you're totally allowed to be here, and I totally, you have your religion, and go ahead, as long as you don't get in my face. Do I really want you in office? No, because I think it's a Christian nation, so I'm not probably going to vote for you. Just doesn't matter what you say or do. If your policy positions help me or my community, I actually don't care. I'm not going to vote for you. I'm not going to try to hurt you per se, but we all have a tacit agreement. I founded the country. You're here because I let you. And so don't get out of line and don't mess up, and to be vocal about it, and don't demand things, and don't be Ilhan Omar, and don't be Rashida Tlaib, and don't be Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Don't be like them. Just hang out and be quiet and have your life. You're in America. It's good, isn't it? On the whole other end, there's a new book out. I'll just give you a really extreme example. It's called The Case for Christian Nationalism by Stephen Wolfe. It's a disgusting, disgusting book. And don't pay for it, please. But in that book, he basically argues that we should have a government that is run by a set of Christian magistrates. And he says that there will be blasphemy laws and there'll be Sabbath laws. And that if you don't go to church on Sunday, we'll put you in jail. And you're thinking, this is crazy. Come on, Brad. You're talking about some manifesto some guy wrote in his basement. It broke the top 100 on Amazon Books when it came out. So I've written a couple books. I'm not going to lie. You check my rating there. Not near the 100. Usually, I don't know if anybody checks Amazon rankings, but a lot of academic books are in the 1 million, right? Hey, you're the 1.2 million book on Amazon. For you to be in the top 100 means you're selling a lot of books. A month after the release of the book, it came out November 1. It's now December 2 or 3. It's still in the top 5,000. So that is the other end. And in that view, he says, look, if you're Jew or Muslim or Buddhist or secular, you may need to be exported, or you may need to be in jail.
Well, and it helps too that, we've got these knuckleheads like Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who now are openly just saying, yeah, totally, we're Christian nationalisms, and Boebert with their nonsense about there not being any kind of separation of church and state. It's really, really infuriating. The fact that the race in Georgia is so close right now is, it's hard to have faith in humanity sometimes. And again, I feel like these Friday conversations, that's because the topics are always, about Christian nationalism or, vote deny or election deniers or whatever. And so we end up kind of just being like, God, what do we do now? We're all screwed. But let's see if we can maybe find some hope. Here's some comments here. It seems like the idea of this Christian domination is an extension of the doctrine of discovery. Another comment from Jeffrey: I'm so confused. How can a movement be both Zionist and Nazi? Interesting. Yep. And so why is there an obsession with the end times and the apocalypse? I feel like, especially with like these people who don't even go to church, probably have never read the Bible, but they're determined to say that we're all working towards getting to the end times. So why is there this obsession in 2022, where we have the internet, where we have, so much scientific discovery, great advances and, technology and things like that? How is this even happening?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think that one of the ways, and I know that y'all are going to talk with Dr. Mia Bloom about conspiracy, and Dr. Mia Bloom knows way more about that than I do. But, I think this does touch into that realm, and maybe it'll come up with her, is that there's a sense in which when people have grievance or resentment or dissatisfaction or anger, they need a story to back that emotion up. And that the stories that they find are often the ones that they hear on the radio in Oklahoma or on Fox News or from Rush Limbaugh and all of his inheritors, and from Alex Jones and all of the Facebook groups where everyone's talking about how this is why your life is terrible. These are the people who did this to you. This is why you feel this way. And so you need to realize that they're the enemy. And guess what? If we don't act quickly, it'll all be over. Your kids, they're never going to have a future. You think you've got it bad? Generation after us, they won't even know what America is. And so the end times to me is a way to conjure immediacy and urgency for a story that says everything's gone wrong because of these people, and if we don't get rid of them soon, it's all over. We don't have time. And it's also a way to justify extreme action. If we don't have time, I'm not going to listen. I'm not going to wait for the next election cycle. I'm not accept defeat. I'm not going to say, well, we'll get them next time. I'm going to say, the election's not over. I refuse to concede. Whatever I need to do, it's not about democracy. It's not, democracy is not a sacred value here. Power is. And that's the bottom line.
I'm going to skip one question and we'll go back to the one that's coming from Martha. Martha's actually on our board of directors, based in Tucson. Wait, no, Mary's based in Tucson, just kidding. So I'm going to skip to Mark's question, and he says, how do Jehovah's Witnesses fit into this picture?
It's a good question. So Jehovah's Witnesses have historically been seen by evangelicals and Catholics as outside of the pale of what they would call mainstream Christianity. And so Jehovah's Witnesses have been seen as even further afield than Mormons. Mormons are usually seen as kind of one step outside the field. Jehovah's Witnesses 3 or 4. However, things have changed. Mitt Romney ran for president in 2012, and Billy Graham said, go for it, Mitt Romney. We'd rather have you than Barack Obama. So in this day and age, what's more important is the cultural identity in the story. And so if you're a Jehovah's Witness and you're telling the story of the Christian nation having fallen away from God and heading toward apocalyptic doom, then yes, we might disagree. Yes, I may not think of you as having the right interpretation of the Bible, but you'll probably be yelling with me at the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors. You may probably be yelling with me at the PTA meeting, so I'm not going to turn you away. There's a lot more detail to get into there, and you probably need somebody who's an expert on Jehovah's Witnesses, but that's a kind of broad answer to that question. I hope it makes sense. Yeah.
All right, so let's end with this, because again, Friday discussions sometimes can be a little bleak. But the fact that I feel like every week that we have these discussions, we're seeing more and more people engage, whether it's on our Facebook or whether it's actually here live in the webinar, that gives me hope. The fact that Christian nationalism and atheism tend to be trending on Twitter a lot more frequently now gives me hope. And the fact that we know that the nuns, right, the people who have no religious affiliation, continue to grow day after day after day. And I can tell you with my own children who are in their 20s and all of their friends, they think the notion of spending a Sunday at church is ridiculous. But at the same time, these young people are also willing to devote Saturdays and Sundays and evenings to knock on doors, to make phone calls. You know, that's the kind of, I guess, spirituality that they have, right? You know, or engagement, activism, like doing good and remembering their fellow man. One quick comment, Diane, again, I'll be so happy when the rapture happens and they all leave. Same. Okay, so the final question today is to give us some hope. How do we fight the Christian nationalists and actually save our democracy, Brad?
So I think focusing on things that are happening that are positive is really helpful. We do this on my show. We talk about how we have transgender lawmakers at state levels now, in state legislatures. We talk about how we have openly gay, gay and lesbian governors, right, from Oregon to Massachusetts. We talk about how in Wilmington, North Carolina, a place of historical exclusion of Black voters, there's now a Black woman mayor. Brianna, we talk about the Mayor Wu in Boston, who's the first Asian American and first woman to be mayor in Boston, and so on and so forth. So there are reasons for hope if we are willing to see them and accept them. And as you're saying, there are reasons to see people fighting for what's right. I think if people want to feel hope and not just doom scroll, which is something I'm always tempted to do, I always just say, and obviously this group is part of that, and a lot of you are already doing this, but the other side is invested not just in the White House and in the governor's office. They're invested in PTA spots, school board spots. They're invested in comptroller spots, county supervisor spots. They're invested in every ligament, tissue, organ of our democracy. And so we have to as well. They're also invested in every issue that matters to the human condition. And so what I always encourage people to do is say, what is yours? Where is your battle? Is it to fight for reproductive rights? Is it to fight for voting rights? Is it to fight for fair elections? Is it environmental? And do that thing. Get involved, volunteer, go get with others, because it feels good to be with other people and to see other people trying and working and accomplishing. It just feels good to have that sense of community and that sense of shared solidarity, and then support people who are fighting battles that you're not and you can't, but you know are important, right? But I think for me, there's just a real sense that what matters is the executive head of the democracy, and we often forget the nervous system and the endocrine system and the phalanges and all the muscles and organs and everything in between. And that's how we save the democracy. It's not Biden 24, which I know. You don't have to tell me. I'm not saying, well, it's not whoever, I know. It's not, I can feel the comments coming in, people tweeting at me already. It's not anything 2020. It's about what's going on in your community, your school board, your place, what's going on in the place where you live. Because if we all fight on that level, then there's a chance to save democracy. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Well, and that's really it too. And while we, saw some big victories at the, top of the ticket here in Arizona, we also saw some defeats all the way up and down the ballot. So absolutely. Brad, thank you so much. I was so excited, and I love your podcast, and everybody should definitely pre-order Brad's book. Check out his podcast, Straight White American Jesus. You won't regret it. And you might lose some productivity, but just put on your earbuds and you can vacuum or sweep or mop the floor, whatever you need to do. They're well worth the listen. We also have our Secular Summit next week. It'll be on the 10th. So if you haven't registered, please go ahead and do that. And Brad, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule. And I look forward to connecting with you at some point in the future.
Thanks for having me, and I'm glad you were patient in the car and all that business. Thank you very much. So
right on. All right, everybody, have a great weekend, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Take care.